All right, so in today's video, we're going to be talking about how to burn off belly fat for good. But first, a disclaimer. None of what I'm going to say has been evaluated by a government institution. I am not a licensed medical professional, and this is just information. This is not medical advice, and this is what I believe to be true right now, but research is ongoing and more information will always be brought to light in the future. So the majority of Americans have already tried dieting and they see no lasting change. So the traditional answer that's given to people who want to burn off belly fat is all you have to do is cut calories and belly fat's going to go away. But the problem with this is that eventually you have to get out of the calorie deficit or you're going to die. And the belly fat comes back and it comes back worse. So there's a problem here. And the calorie deficit doesn't fix the root problem of why the belly fat existed in the first place. So this study shows here that our metabolism will slow down over time to match our low calorie intake. So if you cut down to 1,800 calories, your metabolism will drop to 1,800 calories, and the fat loss will stop. If you cut down to 1,600 calories, you'll lose a little bit more fat, and then your metabolism will drop again. So at a certain point, your, quote, total energy expenditure will plateau, and this supports a constrained total energy expenditure model. Basically, what this means is that as you eat less and less food, your metabolism will drop to that new level of food, which means this is how some people get stuck at 1,200 calories a day, is because they kept lowering their calories lower and lower and lower, and now they're just tired and fatigued because they're not eating very much food, and they still have the belly fat. When you stop dieting, and you need to stop dieting because you can't live in a calorie deficit forever, when you start to eat more again, your body starts sending hormones to make you eat more and more food. It makes you overeat. Now, the reason why this happens is because during your diet, your lean tissue is actually disappearing. Now, that lean tissue could be things like muscle, but it's also your organs, things like your liver and your heart and your pancreas. They actually start to shrink. So your organs are losing the mass that they need to operate properly. When the dieting finishes, your body says, oh, there's food again. And it starts telling you to eat more and more and more to regain that lean tissue and to rebuild your organs. So the reason why people regain all the fat and then some after finishing their diet is because their body is telling them to protect your health, to protect your organ health. And so the calories in, calories out model, it's a damaging Sisyphean game plan. You will always cut calories, you'll diet, you'll lose a little bit of fat, you'll lose some of your organ weight, and then you need to eat again. So then you start eating more, and then you regain back all the weight, and then you feel awful about yourself, and you do another diet, and it just keeps happening over and over and over again. And we need to find a different game plan. Now, the reason why people overeat, it is, quote, our body is forcing people to overeat and save energy to sustain metabolic function of cells. So basically what this means is that the reason why we feel this compulsion to eat more and more food is because our cells need the energy to function properly. So we're eating more calories just to keep things running. Obesity is linked to other problems beyond too much fat. So it's not just simply a calorie issue. Quote, obesity is associated with lower cognition in adults. These associations may be mediated by pro-inflammatory cytokines, leptin, and C-reactive proteins. So we know that obesity is linked to something going on, some kind of inflammatory process. And so it's not just as simply as you just ate too much and you need to eat a little less. There's something else going on. This is the current mainstream understanding of fat. So on the outside, you can see this layer of fat. That's called subcutaneous fat. That's normal fat. You can pinch it. And then there's a layer of muscle. So it says abdominal muscle here. And then there's this little fat cavity, and they call it here intra-abdominal fat. This is called visceral fat, and it's fat that's around your organs. But researchers have now discovered that there's a new type of fat, and it's called deep subcutaneous adipose tissue, or DSAT. You could just call it deep fat. We call it stubborn fat, and it's divided with this layer of fascia. And the deep fat, the fat globules are more irregular. They're larger in size, and they're all different shapes and sizes, and there's less blood flow to them. And researchers have found out that this deep fat acts as a bridge to the bad visceral fat that's all around your organs. So the more of the visceral fat that you have around your organs, the more of the deep fat that you'll have that's on top of your muscles. And so researchers have found this. And so on the left here, we've got a MRI scan of 2 teenagers. Now the teenager on the left, he's actually fatter. So he's got a 41% body fat, and the teenager on the right has a 38% body fat level. Traditional thinking would be that the person on the left is more unhealthy because he's got more body fat. But if you look at the amount of superficial fat, which is the normal kind of fat, this is fat that's just stored calories, he has more of the superficial fat and less of the deep fat and less of the visceral fat compared to the teenager on the right. And this is actually shown in the blood markers. So the teenager on the right has worse triglycerides and worse insulin levels. So he's at a much higher risk of metabolic diseases, even though he's less fat. So the person on the left actually does just have a lot of stored calories. If he were to do a diet, he might end up looking pretty good. The boy on the right actually just has a large amount of deep fat, deep stubborn fat. He has a large amount of visceral fat, and he's got metabolic problems. So in this study, we can see here recent evidence revealed that several biological and genetic differences between intra-abdominal visceral fat and peripheral subcutaneous fat. So what that means is that there's a difference in our body when you have the regular pinchable subcutaneous fat, and there's a difference with the visceral fat and the deep fat that's all around our belly. So the belly fat is linked to something called chronic inflammation. So here's another one. Belly fat is linked to insulin resistance. That means that your body is having problem using insulin properly. Here's another one. Belly fat is linked to having a fatty heart. Epicardial adiposity has a strong positive association with visceral adiposity. So you can't just diet away heart fat. You can't diet away belly fat. There's something else going on. Belly fat is linked to fatty liver disease. So a larger waist circumference, a higher BMI, higher levels of body and visceral fat, and the metabolic syndrome is significantly correlated with the presence of fatty liver. So now you've got a fatty liver, you've got a fatty heart, you've got organs that are coated with fat. This isn't something you can diet your way out of. And we owe it to our children to figure out what's causing this, because childhood obesity is surging. And according to this study, 10 to 20% of the general pediatric population already has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So these little kids who are struggling with obesity, they already have fatty liver disease. These kids shouldn't be struggling with fatty liver disease at their age. And coinciding with all of this new obesity problems and belly fat problems, we're finding out that only 12% of American adults are metabolically healthy. So most people, the vast majority of people, are not actually healthy. Here's a paper on chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation leads to several diseases that collectively represent the leading causes of disability and mortality worldwide, such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and autoimmune and neurodegenerative disorders. So to solve the stubborn fat at the root cause, we're also going to need to solve cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Now that sounds easier said than done, and it already sounds almost impossible. But we can figure this out. We cause this problem, and we can figure out how to get out of it. So belly fat and inflammation is linked to declining immunity. So there's a dysfunction of our T cells. Those are our thymic cells that powers our immune system. And vitamin D deficiency is linked to visceral belly fat. So the results showed that all subjects with the visceral adipose tissue had significant hypervitaminosis D. So what that means is that they didn't have enough vitamin D levels. Here's another study on visceral fat. Dietary vitamin A may reduce abdominal adiposity and promote visceral fat to subcutaneous body fat redistribution. So basically what they're saying is that the people with the belly, they have a vitamin A deficiency. Here's another study here. Dietary intake of vitamin A was negatively associated with visceral fat, meaning that the more vitamin A that was in your diet, the less visceral fat you would tend to have. Here's another study, vitamin A deficiency and its association with visceral adiposity in women. So that means women who had more of the visceral fat had a vitamin A deficiency. And here's a vitamin A deficiency changing the immune response in obesity. Obese individuals have been found to have lower vitamin A levels and lower vitamin A intake compared with normal weight individuals. Another thing to pay attention to is that belly fat is linked to low testosterone. So visceral adiposity index, so basically how much fat was around the organs, was significantly associated with a higher prevalence of hypogonadism in Chinese men. So hypogonadism means that the gonads aren't performing properly, and that's linked to low testosterone. Visceral fat in men is associated with worse levels of insulin and blood sugars, and it's negatively associated with testosterone. So basically, the higher your testosterone is, the lower your visceral fat will be, and the higher your visceral fat is, the lower your testosterone will be. And in this study, they gave men exogenous testosterone, so they gave them TRT, and they were starting to lose the fat at the waist. Here's a different study here. Weight loss with testosterone treatment was almost exclusively due to loss of body fat. So when men are given testosterone, they lose the body fat. I'm not recommending TRT. There's a problem going on right now, and we should fix it at the root cause. I don't think the answer is to just do more and more pharmaceuticals to get ourselves out of this hole. We also don't want to ignore digestive symptoms. So toxins leaking from the gut are damaging fat cells and driving weight gain. So there's some sort of link with the visceral fat and gut problems. And here's a study showing here that the liver directly accepts blood from the gut and is therefore exposed to intestinal bacteria. So we're finding out that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is responsible for endotoxemia, systemic inflammation, and the consequences include obesity and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we're seeing that there's some sort of connection between bacteria and getting organ damage and visceral fat. There's something going on there. H. pylori, which is a type of bacteria, is currently under investigation for GERD, asthma, and inflammatory bowel disease. And H. pylori infection has been suggested to play a role with pancreas issues and liver issues, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. They're finding detection of this H. pylori right in the liver. So they're trying to figure this out. H. pylori, as part of the microbiome dysbiosis, is also viewed as a potential trigger of autoimmune inflammation of the pancreas. So what is going on here? They're finding out that this bacteria from bad gut health is getting into our organs. And interestingly enough, smoking and drinking kill this infection. So smoking was negatively associated with H. pylori infection, and that risk of infection went down as you increase the amount of smoking. And it was the same thing with drinking. And so it explains our vices. Why are people drawn to drinking so much or smoking cigarettes? It's because it's helping to kill this infection, which is getting into our organs. Now, I'm not suggesting that we start drinking or start smoking cigarettes. I don't smoke, but it does explain why people feel the compulsion to drink and smoke. And this is important because when we have this infection, this bacteria causes our blood to aggregate, and our blood becomes sludgy and slow because our blood starts to clot around the infection. This sludgy, thick blood leads to organ dysfunction over time. That leads to health problems, and that leads to the storage of the belly fat, the fat all around the organs. So in morbidly obese humans, impaired pancreatic blood flow may contribute to the beta cell dysfunction and the pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes. So we know that the diabetes is linked to the inflammation, and that inflammation is linked to the belly fat. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up aspirin is that aspirin coats the red blood cells, and that allows the blood cells to shear and to start moving more, even when they're kind of sticky and sludgy. And so aspirin can help to speed up blood flow. And so it's possible that aspirin could cut that fat around the liver and other organs. But I'm not recommending aspirin because aspirin does have side effects. As those red blood cells can shear a little bit more, sometimes they can burst. And if that happens, the blood gets taken out of play. So it can cause anemia. It can cause liver issues over time because the liver helps to generate blood. And those with severe clotting issues, it could cause nosebleeds or other kinds of bleeding throughout the body. So I'm not suggesting aspirin. I'm just using these studies as a example of where this power is coming from. So it shows here aspirin's fat burning mechanism found. Here's another study showing the inflamed adipose tissue. ASA can efficiently help fight against the inflammation. And this is the problem because aspirin can actually elongate people's lives. So if you're an older person who doesn't have enough time to deal with the root cause, they've been finding that aspirin may actually extend people's lifespan just by getting that blood to move again. So it's all about getting that blood flow to move. In a previous video I did on low testosterone, I suggested that the cause of low testosterone was a varicocele, which was these enlarged veins leading down to the testicle. As the blood flow can't get to and away from the testicle, it causes the testicles to shrink, causing low testosterone. So sludgy blood to the testicles could be the cause of low testosterone. And as we know, low testosterone is linked to the visceral fat. So there's something going on with blood flow as far as I can see. So my argument is that the root cause of belly fat, the first thing is that stubborn fat is real. Don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking all you have to do is a calorie deficit and then it's going to go away. There's a reason why people are struggling with this issue for 10, 20, 30 years. They can't fix it because they haven't been using the right game plan. So stubborn fat is real and it is different from regular subcutaneous fat, which is just energy storage. Stubborn fat is linked to chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is linked to cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. So fixing the root cause, fixing the chronic inflammation, it's worth the time. It's worth the effort and it's worth the money to try and figure out how to solve this problem. Chronic inflammation, as far as I can see, is linked to a declining immune system. Bacterial overload and toxic exposure on the body will cause a burden on the immune system. The immune system needs to kill the bacteria. The immune system needs to clear out all these metals and toxins that it's being exposed to. Immune dysfunction causes a lack of enough healthy blood, and that slows down bacterial overgrowth. It clots around them, and it makes blood sticky and sludgy. Now that causes a problem for our organs. So the sludgy blood and bacterial overload causes fatigue and eventually organ damage. Our body responds by putting protective fat around the organs, and this is called visceral fat, and that's what pushes the belly out. The body's just shoving more and more fat around the organs. So how do we burn belly fat for good? We've got a few different tactics we can do. These are temporary tactics, but they work fast. So what I mean by temporary is that it's not going to solve it for good. But cardio will improve blood flow, and that will help melt away that belly fat as long as you're doing the cardio. So if you're sedentary right now and you're not working out at all, the first thing I would suggest is just to get your steps up. So if you can get up to, if you're doing 4,000 steps a day, try and get up to 6,000. If you're doing 6,000, try and get up to 8,000. You want to get to at least 10,000 steps a day. 12,000 is even better. You start to reach a ceiling. Doing 16,000 steps isn't really better than 14,000 steps, but you just want to start moving. Your calf muscles will work as a second heart, and it'll just help to get that blood flowing. That blood flowing is going to help your organs work better and your immune system to work better. If you are young and you can handle more stress at the moment and you just want to get rid of the spare tire as quickly as possible, you can do more intense cardio. You can do cardio a couple times a week. You could do some HIIT, or you can mix up some moderate intensity, do different tactics of cardio to get different adaptations. So you just want to get that blood flow moving, and cardio is a great way to do that. The other thing that will drive fast results is while you're working on the longer term ideas, you can just stop eating foods that you can't digest. So we know that it's linked to this gut problem, and then that gut problem leads to this bacteria, and that's getting out to your organs, causing the stubborn fat. So you can just stop eating foods that you can't digest right now. One of the simplest symptoms to pay attention to is anything that's causing throat clearing, like like going like that, or acid reflux as a more severe one, or especially anything that gives you like severe bloating or gut issues. These are a list. This is just an article. These are a list of common foods that give people problems. So fried food, fast food, pizza, which is white flour that's been fortified with iron, and pasteurized dairy, potato chips with seed oils. Some people don't do well with chilies, stuff like that, any hot foods. A lot of this is cheese, dairy, and stuff with white flour in it. Other people don't do well with tomatoes and nightshades, citrus fruits, chocolate. Chocolate has a high amount of lead and nickel, which can feed bad bacteria. Peppermint and carbonated beverages. So you just want to pay attention to what's causing gut problems and just stop eating those foods. The two biggest ones in my experience after working with many people is pasteurized dairy and iron fortified white flour. So if you just avoid those two things, that will probably get rid of a lot of your gut issues if you're struggling with that. So keep a food log, pay attention to how things make you feel, and do little experiments like apple cider vinegar shots and stuff. That stuff doesn't fix the root cause, but it does help to improve digestion today, and that can help you get rid of the belly fat quickly. So the long-term fixes, this is how you're going to get rid of the belly fat for good, but they're slower. These are things that might take many months, maybe even a year or two to fully flesh out. And so let's talk about unraveling the root cause here. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to stubborn fat. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to chronic inflammation. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to the fatty liver and insulin resistance. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to an H. pylori infection. Remember that infection in your gut that's causing digestion problems. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to not generating enough healthy blood. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to a dairy intolerance. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to celiac disease and other reactions to foods, so minor food allergies. Chronic diseases often start off seasonally, so what that means is they'll get worse. The symptoms will come in the winter, and then they'll kind of go away in the spring and the summer, and then they'll come back in the winter until at a certain point they just get so bad that it's just all the time. So things like MS and irritable bowel, those things will come worse in the winter. So just like flu and cold season, it comes in the winter when our vitamin D levels are lower. So all of these autoimmune issues are linked to vitamin D as well. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to a liver cancer and pretty much all other cancers. You can take a deeper look into it. Vitamin D levels linked to the fatty liver disease, which is linked to stubborn fat. Vitamin D levels linked to fatty liver disease. Vitamin D levels linked to metabolic dysfunction, associated fatty liver disease. All of these things are linked to stubborn fat. So I'm just trying to use some conjecture here to point at where we could find a solution. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to food allergies. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to having higher cholesterol. They have found that diabetics deficient in vitamin D can't process cholesterol normally, so it builds up in their blood vessels. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to arthritis, so you'll find out that arthritis is linked to inflammation, which is linked to the stubborn fat. Vitamin D can also help with blood flow, and it helps with blood sugar controls, so it helps get rid of that platelet aggregation where the blood starts to clot and get sticky. Vitamin D will arm our immune system, and that modulates gut health. Vitamin D can fight against cancer by improving gut bacteria species. And in this study, ultraviolet radiation increases appetite without gaining any fat by boosting the metabolism. So when people are exposed to the ultraviolet radiation from the sun, their appetite goes up, and they eat more food and they don't gain fat. So there's a metabolic issue going on there, and the radiation from the sun can help. Sunshine exposure reduces fat gain and reduces signs of heart disease. Remember that the heart disease is linked to the stubborn fat. Interestingly, a ketogenic diet raises vitamin D levels. Now, why could that happen? You stop eating foods that aren't agreeing with your digestion, and that can take a burden off the immune system, allowing your vitamin D levels to increase. High fiber intake was suspected the reason for the reduced bioavailability of vitamin D for higher prevalence of rickets in Asian immigrants population. So in this study, they found that fiber intake could lower vitamin D. Caffeine intake might lower vitamin D. We're not sure about that. So this could be a good reason to pull back on the coffee a little bit if you feel like you're struggling with a lot of stubborn belly fat, especially in the winter. But it's also in the winters when you feel the most craving for some caffeine as a pick-me-up, right? So how do we burn belly fat for good? If we want to focus on vitamin D, can't I just take a supplement? Here's a paper talking about how once we discovered vitamin D supplementation, we started to see the rise of the allergy pandemic. People stopped going out in the sun and we said, oh, we'll just take a vitamin D supplement. So my question to you is, synthetic pharmaceutically produced vitamin D3 the same as sunshine or ultraviolet exposure? That's my question. Excess intake of vitamin D causes hypercalcemic toxicity. Experiments with different animal species have shown that long-term supply of oral vitamin D in apparently non-toxic amounts causes atherosclerosis in large arteries. So even the amounts that we think aren't dangerous of this synthetic vitamin D might be causing issues. Supplemental vitamin D doses of 3,200 to 4,000 appear to increase the risk of hypercalcemia and some other adverse effects in a small proportion of individuals, indicating that this dose is not completely safe. So even at that small dose of just 3,000 to 4,000 IU can be problematic for some people. In the 1940s and 50s, high doses of vitamin D were given to infants, and it resulted in them developing hypercalcemia. There were reports in Great Britain of infants who had altered facial structure, heart problems, mental retardation, and hypercalcemia. And so they actually banned in Britain, they actually banned putting vitamin D into foods because of all of these problems. Now, America and Canada and a few other countries, I think like Sweden or Finland, they are adding this synthetic vitamin D to foods, and that could be a problem because you're overdosing on one type of hormone instead of getting the full blend of what sunshine would give us. Baby deaths mystery from 1930 solved because they found out that those with, quote, abnormal gene shapes were getting side effects from the vitamin D supplement. So a wave of baby deaths in the 30s and 40s was caused because they were adding vitamin D3 to the bread, milk, and margarine. Vitamin D toxicity is caused by supplements, not by diet or sun exposure. So there's something different about the synthetic vitamin D compared to it even in food. I'm just throwing this out there, but researchers are still trying to figure out the optimal form of the vitamin D supplements. So they're actually doing experiments on this. So there's a new form of vitamin D that is trying to bypass the liver. So when you take the vitamin D supplement right now, it goes to your liver to get some enzymes to get processed. So researchers are now trying this new form. And if you go look up the anecdotes on Amazon reviews and things like that, they're like, oh, wow, this one doesn't cause me nausea, or this one doesn't make me feel like puking. So there's something going on with the synthetic supplements, in my opinion. And I'm not saying don't take vitamin D. I'm just saying that there's some people who don't do well with it, and that I don't think it replaces the totality of the sun. Sunshine is much beyond just vitamin D3. There's ultraviolet A, there's ultraviolet B, there's infrared radiation, the red light therapy. And could there also be underappreciated benefits of being outdoors? So there's, with fresh air, there's negative ions. There's more fresh air, which has higher levels of oxygen and less carbon dioxide. Here's a study. More sun means a better immune system. the human body's defense against infection. The thymus cells keep us healthy by finding and destroying foreign pathogens. Now researchers know that these thymus cells need vitamin D to be armed. But it goes beyond that. Here's a different study that quote, the skin has a large share of thymic cells in humans, approximately twice the number that are circulating in the blood. We found that sunlight makes hydrogen peroxide in thymic cells, which make the cells move. So there's something going on beyond vitamin D here. The sunlight is charging the thymic cells with hydrogen peroxide somehow. In a study here, narrow band ultraviolet B exposure 3 times a week is more effective in treating vitamin D deficiency than taking the supplements. In a study on rats, they took 2 groups of rats, they made them vitamin D deficient. They gave one group the supplement and they gave the other group was left outside in a field in an open cage. And the group of rats that was left out in the field to get real sunshine had their vitamin D deficiency better fixed, and their bones were remodeling and their bone structure fixing was much better than with the supplements. So there's something going on here. Now, some people would say that ultraviolet radiation is bad for you, and it can be a burden on the body for sure, but it's also giving us something as well. And so here's a quote from a paper. Some scientists worry that the emphasis on preventing skin cancer tends to obscure the much larger mortality burden posed by more life-threatening cancers, such as lung, colon, and breast cancer. So it's possible that too much sun that causes sunburning could be bad for the skin, but this fear around going outside could be causing much larger issues with other cancers that are more deadly. Here's a paper on inadequate sunlight exposure in patients with inflammatory bowel disease. So we're noticing that people aren't getting enough sun, and that's causing these gut issues, and now you can't digest food. There's a beneficial effects on sun exposure in cancer mortality. So sunlight has a paradoxical relationship with melanoma, in that if you get sunburns, that initiates the skin cancer. However, if you get long-term regular sun exposure, that inhibits melanoma. So what that means is that the more sun that you get, the less skin cancer from the deadly melanoma you will get. Roles of solar ultraviolet radiation and vitamin D in reducing cancer risk and increasing survival. 15 types of cancer for which UVB exposure and vitamin D concentrations have been found associated with reduced risk, meaning that the more sun that you get, the less the risk you have of cancer. So this is one of the things that I think is missing from the conversation, is that people are like, oh, you need sunshine, so go out in the direct sun in midday and roast. And I don't think that that's a good idea. I don't think spending 2 hours out in midday sun and getting a sunburn is better. I think what we should be doing, but this is not medical advice, but I think we should just be outside longer, but in the shade with the reduced sunshine. So the exposure intensity is lower and then just more chronic. So if you hang out in the shade for 8 hours, I think that's a lot better than going outside for 30 minutes and burning. And in this study, they found out that shade is an important UV minimization strategy, but it may play an important role in providing the human body with enough ultraviolet B radiation for vitamin D production. So hanging out in the shade, the ultraviolet B rays bounce and they get to you, they go into your eyes, they go into your skin, and that helps you to generate vitamin D and no sunburn. So that's great. We also want to keep in mind that the sun does create a minor burden on the body. It oxidizes vitamin A. So as we talked about, a lot of people aren't eating enough vitamin A, especially those struggling with belly fat. And so solar radiation has opposite effects on vitamin A. It catabolizes vitamin A, so that means it brings down vitamin A, but it increases vitamin D. So a lot of people are low on both vitamin A and vitamin D, so they need to eat more vitamin A while increasing their time outdoors to raise their vitamin D. So both things need to happen. And there are studies on eating a diet that helps to recuperate after sun exposure. Those compounds are vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin K2. So some examples of that are fresh raw juice. Eating animal organs are high in vitamin A. Grass-fed meat from animals that are raised outdoor on pasture that have access to fresh green grass. So the fresh green grass has something called pre-vitamin A. The animals eat the grass. They turn that pre-vitamin A into active vitamin A, at which point we eat them, and then we get that vitamin A. So you don't want, the simplest way to explain it is you want to eat healthy animals to become healthy. So when you put an animal outside, their vitamin D levels will raise. When you give them fresh green grass to eat, their vitamin A levels will rise. So if you give them access to grass and you give them access to being outdoors, they're going to have a lot higher levels of these vitamins. And then when you eat them, you get those vitamins. If you keep the cattle indoors and you feed them a bunch of grains, which doesn't have the vitamin A, then it's no surprise that the animals get fat and sick, and they're full of marbling, and there's very little nutrition in them. Vitamin A and E absorb ultraviolet light, responsible for the most deleterious biological effects of the sun. So we want to get enough vitamin A and E, and we'll talk about how to do that in the future. My favorite example is grass-fed beef tallow. It's very, very high in vitamin A and E and K2 and B12. Great food. So how else can we burn off belly fat? Well, we can avoid toxic burdens which hurt the immune system. So in this study here, water fluoridation is linked to a vitamin D deficiency and diabetes. So water fluoride levels had a negative correlation with vitamin D deficiency and a positive correlation with blood glucose levels. So if the water was fluoridated for your teeth, that caused a vitamin D deficiency, and it also caused for your blood sugars to rise. And we know that the diabetes and the vitamin D deficiency is linked to stubborn fat. So could tap water fluoridation be a cause of stubborn fat? Excessive fluoride intake may induce multiple organ and tissue damage, including skeletal, nervous, digestive, respiratory, I don't know how to say that word, and endocrine system. So it could be that fluoride is hurting our body, and that's what's causing the stubborn fat to build up. Here's a paper where they're studying rats. Is water fluoridation a hidden cause of obesity? Sodium fluoride, which is water fluoridation, causes damage in rat brains, and it was causing a vitamin A deficiency. And we found out, remember, that the vitamin A deficiency was linked to stubborn fat. So I would recommend, this is not a medical recommendation. I do personally avoid fluoride. I avoid tap water that's been fluoridated. I avoid using fluoridated toothpaste. I use something else to remineralize called hydroxyapatite. I would just investigate your option to get away from fluoride as much as possible. Pesticides are linked to a vitamin D deficiency. Some medications might be a cause of vitamin D deficiency, which could be causing gut problems, leading to that stubborn fat. So this is not medical advice, okay? So this is just information, but statin therapy adversely affects the neuromuscular junction and intestinal barrier, which potentially induces systemic inflammation. So people taking statins may want to investigate this. Statins may increase the prevalence of type 2 diabetes. So they're still trying to figure out how that might be happening. Another thing to be careful of, I don't want to get this channel banned too early, so maybe you can just read this yourself, but some metals that can cause dysfunction in organs, and that organ dysfunction can manifest as brain problems, bone problems, gut problems. And so this exposure to aluminum in all sorts of different ways can cause a burden on the body. Here's another study. Ibuprofen can alter testicular physiology to produce a state of hypogonadism, meaning that ibuprofen, which you think it's just a painkiller that doesn't really have any side effects, it's causing testicular shrinkage, which is linked to that low testosterone, and that low testosterone is linked to belly fat and all sorts of problems. So some of these medications that we've been told are safe, we don't know how safe they are. There's also the exposure to lead and other heavy metals. For example, in this study, that diabetes can be a link to exposure to environmental lead. So if you're working with a lot of different metals in your work, if you're like a metal worker or you're a mechanic, or like some of these jobs are exposing you to things that are hard on the immune system. This is something that I would recommend experimenting with, but by law in Canada and America, the government adds iron to white flour because of this weird idea that everyone's becoming anemic, and that's true. So let's just add a bunch of powdered iron to the food. But we're finding out now that our body is actually competing against that iron with bacteria in our body, bad bacteria. And so fortified white flour might be causing gut disruption. So studies in children have shown that excess iron can cause inflammation and growth of pathogenic bacteria. So this is in all your muffins, your pizzas, your bread, which is why I believe a lot of people see some results with gluten-restricted diets. Not so much that it's the gluten per se, but what they're doing to the white flour. So some organic flour is not fortified. You'd have to look into it because some of them still fortify it. But switching to organic white flour that's not fortified could be a good option if you like to bake. Low dietary iron intake restrains the intestinal inflammatory response. So the effects of iron on the body is affected by the intestinal host pathogen interface, meaning that how good your immune system is how well you can tolerate this iron fortification. So if you're not feeling well already, I would experiment with it. Experiment with and without eating white flour that's been fortified. So in this study on Somali people, they were iron deficient. They tried to give them iron to boost their iron deficiency, and it reactivated all these infections that they already had, such as malaria and tuberculosis. So our immune system's keeping all this down, and then you start feeding all this iron to the gut and the body, and all these bacteria just explode because they also like the iron. Since iron is an essential growth factor for H. pylori, it also competes with the host for iron absorption. So that's us. So when you're eating this fortified white flour, it's going to set off your gut bacteria to eat that iron, and they're going to explode in numbers, and that's going to cause issues in us. So avoid the iron fortified flour. So that's a lot of information. We've covered a lot. So how do we get started? How do we burn off belly fat for good? So for some beginner steps, we want to see results quickly. We want to see results that make us feel good, that we know we're moving in the right direction. So we want to do some cardio for blood flow. Lifting weights can also help because it can change your appetite. So if you're feeling motivated and you're feeling healthy enough, I would also look into resistance training. So a good start is 10,000 steps a day. That's a great start for many people. If you're already there, try 12,000 steps. If you're feeling healthy and you're young, maybe do some more intense cardio. Just keep in mind that is stressful on the body, and these results will only stay as long as you're doing them. So if you don't want to commit to doing cardio forever, don't rely on this as a solution. So cardio does work. It will get you results quick, but you're going to have to keep up with it. It's just temporary. Another thing is to look into ways that you can help your blood to flow better. I don't want to recommend aspirin. I don't recommend it, but if you're an older person, you may be fine with those trade-offs. I just want to put the information out there so you can make your own decision. Another option is grounding yourself outdoors. That's another topic for another day, but just sitting outside in the shade with your shoes and socks off, and you put your feet in the sand or put your feet in your backyard grass in a clean spot, that can be a great way to improve your blood flow. We want to stop eating foods that you can't digest. So the way that intermittent fasting and animal-based ketogenic diets work is that you just stop eating. Well, with fasting, you just stop eating foods at all. That's going to give your gut time to heal, but you can't not eat food forever. And it just ignores the root cause, which is the declining immune system. So we do want to fix that. Don't rely on these diets as a crutch. We want to fix the main problem, but these diets can be used in a pinch to help you get visible results quickly or to feel better quickly. You may want to look into experimenting with different diets like that. In my opinion, the two biggest things that will move the needle right now is just avoiding all pasteurized dairy and all iron fortified white flour. So if you remove those two things, you ought to see a huge improvement in your gut and digestive health, which should allow your stubborn fat to go away. If you have the option to, I would try raw dairy if you can't stand the idea of quitting pasteurized dairy, but even raw dairy can be too triggering for some people if they don't have high enough vitamin Ds. You could also try sifted white flour. You could buy your own wheat berries and grind it yourself and sift it yourself if you can't find unfortified flour. A more extreme restriction to think about is avoiding all seeds, all grains, including oats, all starches like potatoes, all legumes, things like that. So you could try removing a lot of different carbs. The problem with ketogenic diets is they start to rely on things like nuts, which can be hard to digest. They eat a lot of seed oils, which are hard on the body because of how it affects the immune system. So pay attention to, keep a food log, pay attention to what sets your gut off, and pay attention to those little subtle things like the like the little throat clearing and the acid reflux, and you should do okay there. So the long-term game plan is to fix your immune system. So an easy one is just to avoid things that burden your immune system. So that includes things like fluoride, chlorine, EMFs, lead, aluminum, microplastics, injections, pesticides. There's a whole lot of things that are like, oh, it's safe in small amounts. And it's like, yeah, but there's a lot of those things that are just in small amounts. And eventually over time they compound and the immune system just can't keep up anymore. So try and take as many burdens away as you can. And then we want to fix the immune system. So we want to give our body what it needs to rebuild. So the first thing is to eat healthy animals to get healthy yourself. So if you're eating a fat, sick cattle that's kept indoors, it doesn't have the nutrition to rebuild you to get away from being fat and sick. So we want to eat healthy animals that are full of nutrition. An animal raised outdoor is going to have high levels of vitamin D and it's fat. An animal raised on pasture with fresh green grass is going to have higher levels of vitamin A, and that's going to help your body to work better as well. So grass-fed pasture-raised beef is best. Wild fish is also an incredible source of vitamin D. There's a reason why it's linked to having higher levels of testosterone, is because wild fish has super high levels of vitamin D. If you don't like fish, you're going to have to find something else, but fish is a great option if you enjoy it. You can also eat organ meats that help your body work better. Now, in my opinion, liver is a little high in iron and copper for some people who don't have a high enough vitamin D. So another great option is pancreas. So it's called, sometimes it's called sweetbreads because it's not that dark red color. It doesn't have much iron or copper, but it has high levels of vitamin A and other great animal compounds that will help your immune system work better. So pancreas is a great thing to eat. Tripe is from the stomach, that seems to help with digestion as well. Bone marrow is where your B cells are made, your immune cells. And so bone marrow that's been roasted and put on some unfortified sourdough bread tastes amazing. So there's lots of different foods that you can eat there to support your immune system to work better. And you want to eat nutritious foods of a varied diet. Things like raw honey, raw fruit juice, fresh fruit, natural raw milk from tested healthy animals that are raised outdoor in pasture, berries, all sorts of these. There's lots of great foods that will help your body to work better. And we also want to focus on getting outside, getting those ultraviolet rays from the sun, getting that fresh air with the negative ions. Light therapy could be something you want to investigate if you live somewhere more north like I do in Canada or a more northern state. Light therapy can be very, very powerful. You may want to look into earthing or grounding as a way to improve blood flow. That's going to help you bring nutrition to your organs and carry away waste. So we want to focus on blood flow as well. Pay attention to any new tactics or new information that is focused on restoring testosterone naturally, improving insulin resistance, or improving your gut, or improving heart health or organ health, because all of those things are linked to inflammation, and that inflammation is linked to your stubborn fat. So if you just pay attention to how to get healthier from the root cause, so not how to get healthier by taking this new supplement or this new pharmaceutical compound, but trying to get healthier from the ground up, that should help you with your stubborn fat as well. So just remember, The fight is against chronic inflammation. That's the long-term game plan. And the short-term game plan is doing more cardio. You can lift weights and don't eat foods you can't digest. So if you have any questions, you can email me at the email I dropped there, team@outlivforever.com. And so anything that fights against inflammation is going to help your body work better. That's going to help your belly fat melt away for good. Now, there's only so much I can cover in a YouTube video, so I'd highly recommend that you go to the link in the description and join the Outlive newsletter. It's free and it can't get censored. I can't get shadow banned, and we could talk about more controversial topics. So I hope I'll see you on the newsletter, and thank you for watching the video, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.